Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nom Watch Review, part of Nom Talk Network. So sorry we're late. That was my bad. Sometimes, when you're trying to run the race, you don't really get there when you want to. But luckily for us tonight, our main star got there when he needed to and then said, I'm done. We're good. On this show, we review the latest film drop or throwback celebrating a milestone while eating and drinking our favorite movie and snacks. Don't forget, y'all, we have merch now. Excuse me. You can find our shop in the About section on Twitch. Subscribers to our Twitch channel get discounts, so please make sure you subscribe to us. We are constantly doing wonderful and amazing things, so that is always beautiful and wonderful. I'm your host tonight, Jordyn Orozco, and right now I'm just having a wonderful, beautiful, amazing Cutwater Tiki Rum Hurricane. It's wonderful, amazing, best. And also some of the hurricanes that Lieutenant Dan and Forrest faced, definitely, when they were fishing on the boat. May I introduce my guests for the evening? These are three lovely ladies that I have never seen in my life, but I'm so happy to be here on this stream tonight. May I introduce Katie, Rachel, and Amanda? It's good to see you all. I'm so excited to talk about this movie with you. And before we get into it, let's go to you, Katie. What are you nomming on? What are you sipping on?
Some water and some steak bites. Yeah, keeping it light, keeping it high protein.
Love that. Love that. We love that. And let's go to Rachel. What are you sipping on? What are you nomming on tonight?
Also water with some Mio in it, lemonade. And technically it's like a little past what I'm supposed to be eating, but if somebody's like, eat something, I have popcorners to munch on if I have to.
We love
Intermittent
that.
fasting.
Yeah, yeah. No, we love that. We love health. We love everybody's diets, everybody's things for their health. So it's great. Amanda, and what about you? Last but not least, what are you drinking? What are you nomming on tonight?
Um, Also water with some blueberry lemonade Mio in it, and then I have carrots and some Triscuit and some roasted garlic hummus.
Okay, so I will take the damage for the entire group this evening with my alcohol. So it's wonderful and great. But it's so good to see you all. And I just want to give a shout out before we start. We are still fundraising for the Trevor Project. Happy Pride Month to everybody out there. I'm wearing my Stonewall shirt that my uncle gave me. So Stonewall with a rainbow, 1969. But also, we love to support a wonderful organization that helps LGBTQ youth not commit suicide. One of the highest rates of suicide rates in the world is with our LGBTQ youth. Please donate to them. They are a wonderful organization. I've worked with them in my job as well, doing events, doing wonderful things to promote, mental health and awareness for our youth, our LGBTQ youth specifically. Also, happy belated Juneteenth to all of the people that celebrate. We love you. We support you. We're here for you. So let's get into this. So if you already don't know, with my little clues, today we're talking about the wonderful film, the 1994 film Forrest Gump. This is definitely a primetime classic for me, right? Like this is 94. I was born in 88. It was sort of one of those things that, my parents showed me when I was young. We have Tom Hanks. We have all of these wonderful freaking stars in this film that have just made an impact, right? And all these things. And I feel like this film, for me at least, was one of my first exposures to DSPS, disabled individuals, that sort of brought it to the forefront of like what exactly, these individuals had to go through, and what obstacles they have to overcome. But the fact that this main character was like hitting every aspect of humanity in so many ways was just absolutely amazing to me. So let's start talking about how we sort of learned about it, how we first came about watching Forrest Gump. Let's start with you, Amanda. What was your first exposure to Forrest Gump, and how did you come about watching it?
So I was 11 when this movie came out. I think I knew about it because my parents are in entertainment, but the first time
Mm.
I actually watched it was on a school trip on the bus from New York driving down to DC. And we watched the entirety of the film and a bunch of 11-year-olds, which probably was not super appropriate, but why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was my exposure to the film was on a school bus trip with 30 other kids on a on the way to DC.
Yeah, it's this is a really interesting pick to show, right? Like school kids around that age. And but also too, I was exposed to this film at a very young age to where I knew some of the themes, but there were some things that I didn't get until I reached sort of like high school era, and then you watch it and you're like, oh, like that didn't make sense, but now it does now, right? Like you sort of have that, thing. Especially when it comes to like sex and all that stuff, you're like, what's going on? And all that stuff. Especially when it comes to consent, when it comes to race, when it comes to racism, all that stuff. Like, you don't really get that. But let's go to you, Rachel. What was your first experience with Forrest Gump?
I honestly don't remember. I'm sure I watched it growing up with my parents. But I don't remember the exact age at which I've seen Forrest Gump. It had been a while since I've seen it recently until I just watched it the other night. Um, but as far as the first time, I don't remember. But I do remember that it always moved me. So I must have been in teenage years. So I don't think
Yeah.
I didn't see it in the theater or anything like that.
Yeah, this wasn't a theater movie. It was a VHS movie for me because we had VHS, and we didn't go see it in the theater, but I do remember my dad like I was just like hey, let's watch this movie, and it like happened, and so that was definitely first experience. Okay, Katie, what about you? What was your first exposure to Forrest Gump?
I saw it on VHS. I was born in late 87. So I saw it. I didn't see it in theaters. So back then things came to VHS like what, like a year after they were in theaters.
Yeah,
So I was likely
yeah,
7 when I saw it. I remember my parents bought it. Um, and it was a very captivating film. Like just like you're saying, there are a lot of elements I truly didn't understand. And I'm still, every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, like there's always something that I catch. So I feel like this
yeah.
this movie's growing with me. Um, but yeah, I was so captivated by it as a 7-year-old. And I look back now, I'm like, wow, it's heavy content for a 7-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, like, so one of the things I think about this film is that it's definitely a movie of its time, but it's also like not. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like it leads us through history, right? Like in a way where it's like digestible for us that are young, but then we also look at it in a way where we're like, shit, like we're following this dude who literally doesn't consider himself special or doesn't consider himself disabled or any sort of like mental like incapacitated or anything like that. And we sort of are like, oh, this is the norm, right? Like this is the normal thing. And so what I appreciated about this film, especially being introduced to it at an early age, I had a when I was in elementary school, I had a paraplegic friend who wore braces, and she, we were super close. She came from a very wealthy family though, and I didn't know what that looked like until I went to her birthday, and it was at this palatial mansion, right? And like it was just all this stuff, but in reality, she was just my friend on the playground, and like that's what it was. And so to me, watching this was a totally normal thing, and I thank my parents for that because it was like it was exposure, it was all this stuff. But I think somebody coming in and watching this, it wasn't necessarily like about that. It was about these experiences where this individual changed lives of major and prominent figures that he interacted with, right? And so I think that's one of the things that I appreciated about it, and one of the things that I appreciated about my parents or my dad specifically exposing me to this film was that it was just normal, right? Like it was a thing where I was just like, oh, like that happens and it's fine. So before we get into talking about story, pacing, directing, all that stuff, let's give our popcorn rating. So let's go to you, Katie, since we went to you last. What would you give this film out of 5 popcorn buckets?
5 buckets.
Nice. We got a
Still learning with it.
yes, yes,
That's amazing.
yes, and why would you give it 5 popcorn buckets?
Because still learning with this movie. Like there's so few movies where you can grow with it and learn so much. So
Mm,
I feel like I don't want to say it's a work in progress movie, but it stands a test of time. And that's really important to me. And so that's why I find those kind of movies to be pretty much perfect.
mm, yeah. And then Rachel, what would you give it? 0 out of 5 popcorn buckets.
I also gave it a 5 popcorn buckets. I actually agree. I agree with everything that Katie said, that it's like a timeless movie. There's many lessons that still apply to life today. Yes, some of the some of the CGI, like the meshing of the black and white footage, probably would be a little better done today, but it doesn't matter because it's funny. It's funny
Yeah.
and fabulous. And uh it's still so heartfelt, so
Yeah.
real. Tom Hanks' portrayal of this man who just wants love, and who uh just is a kind person who just goes into the world and gives joy to everybody. It's yeah, it holds up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amanda, what would you give it? 0 to 5 popcorn buckets.
I gave it a 4 out of 5, or 4.5 out of 5. It's pretty close to perfection for me, but
Mm,
yeah.
yeah. So I ironically, I'm usually not the lowest, but I'm the lowest out of the bunch here tonight. I gave it a 4 out of 5, only because it's not my like absolute favorite movie, but it also just hits in certain ways where other movies don't hit, right? Like I have yet to watch a film where I was significantly impacted by Forrest Gump, right? Like you said, there's certain lessons, and like we get at the end that like life is like a box of chocolate, you never know what you're gonna get. But it's totally true because this film hits every sort of piece of chocolate, right, in our like life box, right, that we sort of encapsulate. And I think a lot of us hit those milestones in one way or another, right? Like, yeah, we may not meet like we may not meet JFK, or we may not meet, some important historical like person, but at the same time, like we all come to a point where we're like, yeah, like I did this thing and it's wonderful and it's great, but now I'm just done, right? Like I can't move on with, I can't do this anymore, and it's okay, and stuff like that. So yeah, my rating may change, as the evening progresses. We'll see. But let's get into the details. Let's get into the nitty gritty. So, what were some of your expectations going into this? So, for me, I had no expectations because I had no idea what the hell this movie was about. And my dad was just like, "Let's just watch it." I'm like, "Okay, cool." Like, I don't know what it is. And I think as a kid, like you come out of it very differently because you experience Forrest as a kid, right? Like, and in that adolescence, very differently than you do as an adult, right? When I watched this for the first time, I shared those experiences, except for being sort of a disabled individual. I shared those experiences of being like in young love, right? Like having that person that was your own, all that stuff. And then as an adult, these were experiences that I had yet to go through. And so for me, I was like, oh, like this is stuff I don't understand, but also this is stuff that is sort of significant. And it was portrayed in a way where it was digestible to me, where I didn't need to understand all of that, but it got me through the movie, if that makes sense. So I think for me, going into it, it was very different. But seeing it as an adult, man, I was just bawling, right? Like you're bawling at certain stages. You're learning with them, like you all had said. You're going through experiences that Forrest has already gone through, or maybe even Jenny, like relating to her experiences, right? Like you're going through those in a way where you're like, I see it in a completely different lens. And so I think that's what I appreciated about seeing it as a child, as a kid, versus seeing it as an adult and still watching it, right? Like at this age, and still enjoying all of that. But let's go to you, Rachel. What were your expectations going in? I know you're like, I don't remember when the first time I saw this, but what was your expectations maybe during and then after, and then seeing it multiple times?
Um, yeah, I guess going back to the first time, I could not tell you what I expected. My parents showed me a lot of movies where I was just like, okay, let's watch this. I do remember, I'm sure that I was bawling my eyes out. I remember several parts during the movie uh, with Bubba and his mother, and of course with Jenny. And he's recalling all of his journeys. That moment where she's like, I wish that I could be there with you, and he's like, you were. I was like, oh my God, oh my God. So yeah, ugly cried all the way. The first like 3 times I ever saw this movie. I actually had my box of tissues on the couch ready and waiting for the tears. Surprisingly, I don't know. I only got really teary-eyed at the very, very end when he was talking to Jenny's grave. So spoiler. Uh but
Spoiler alert.
spoiler. But yeah, I guess I didn't have any expectations going in. I'm pretty sure that I already knew that it was like an Oscar winner by that point. It had been out. It had already won all the awards. We were watching it because we were like, all right, well, we know that this is going to be a great portrayal and a great movie, whatever. So I was expecting it to be great, and it was. And it's
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like I said, it's definitely one of those films that you could watch and you can be like, damn, like this is why film is film. Like this is why we do the things that we do. And then we have these wonderful and tremendous actors, right? Like we have already said, Tom Hanks plays Forrest, Robin Wright, who I freaking love, Princess Bride, right? Like played Jenny. We have Gary Sinise, who played Lieutenant Dan, right? And then Sally Field, obviously, who plays Forrest's mother. I think we get these iconic characters that we can relate to some aspect of our personality, right? Like we may not all be Jenny, but we've all had those wild experiences where we're just like, you know what, we're young, let's just do what we need to do. Yeah, there's consequences, but I don't give a shit, right? Like, and we've been the Lieutenant Dan where we're like, we have been through trials and tribulations, and then now we're depressed, right? Like now it's coming through, right? And we sort of, I think we can relate sort of just minimally to each one of these characters, especially Forrest, right? Like because we're experiencing the story of him through his storytelling. So let's go to you, Katie. What were your expectations before, if you had any? What about when you're watching, and then after? Like, what was that whole experience for you watching this film?
Going into it, I think that I got excited about it as a 7-year-old because one of my favorite movies is Splash, and Tom Hanks is in Splash. And
Yes.
then I watched Princess Bride growing up. So I'm like, this is gonna be like the coolest movie ever. I don't know if I thought it was the coolest though when I first watched it. I was intrigued and totally enamored with it, but definitely tone switch from both the films that they were in. But later on watching it, Gary Sinise grew up 2 towns away from me. Obviously, we're very different ages, but his mark is left in the area with the Steppenwolf Theater. He also does a bunch of stuff. And I've had the pleasure of seeing the Lieutenant Dan Band. Amazing if you get a chance to see them. They're basically a really glorified cover band, but they're so fun. But in terms of, expectations and everything going into it, like let's say now when I watch it, I watch it knowing that I'm going to feel every emotion. As a kid, I was like, they're just so mean to him. And he's just moving on about it. But now I watch it with a historical eye, but also with the idea of how are we treating others based on adversity. So my expectations have certainly evolved from the first time, and then now as a 36-year-old. So very different, but very age appropriate, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Amanda, what was your expectations? What were your feelings while you were watching this and after?
I mean, I don't know that I had expectations of film at all at that age, especially not like something this deep. I knew Tom Hanks from Big and Splash, and I knew Robin Wright from Princess Bride, like everyone else. But I don't think that there was like, oh, this is going to be an amazing movie. This is a deep movie. Like there was like, oh, we're watching a movie, cool, on the bus, great. And again, I mean, seeing it then, and I don't know that I even remember, what I went through emotionally sitting on that bus watching it. I definitely was enamored with it, and I recall seeing it several times following. But it's definitely there, like you said, have gone through periods of time in your life where you identify with one character or another throughout, different parts. It definitely holds up. I still love the movie. But yeah, no real like expectation, I think, as a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah,
11. I
I
was
mean, like,
11, so
yeah, it's like, how can you, right? Like how can you have these expectations? And I think for me, I was just like, oh, like, okay, pop the VHS in, like, right, because that was life back then. It was just like,
hmm
pop it in, let's just watch it. Like, there's no, like, it's not like where we can stream stuff now, where you can just like pause stuff, where you can like do all that stuff. It was like, let's sit as a family and watch this film, right? Like, that was, at least in my house, like, that was a culture. Like, there was nothing, right? Like, they, like, because if you have to pause it or rewind it, it was like, you had to do that, and then you had to push the button, and then you had to wait, and then you had to like go back, and you have to find it. It was just, it was, a thing. It was where now it's just very different.
Wait,
Um,
do you not have
oh,
remote? I'm confused.
at first we didn't. So I'm at that cusp where it was like, I remember the internet being invented, and we didn't have it for a while.
Yeah.
And then my dad had an 8-track in his first car that I remember. Like, this was young. And then he had a cassette player, right? And then we had the TVs with the VHS built into it. This was before you could get a VHS thing and then plug it into your TV, and then the remotes came. Right? Like we had that like machine that would rewind it for you, and like the TV wouldn't do it for you, right? Like, so it was like, that was the thing, right? But I think at this time, yeah, we might have had the remote, but I don't remember. I remember like having, sorry, this is like getting into shit. I remember having a VHS where you had to go up to it, and it had a knob. And if you did this, it would rewind it. And if you did this, it would fast forward it. And then you had play, then you had like skip, or you had like stop, and then you had eject. That was the only thing that the VHS did. And I remember watching Forrest Gump with that one. Yeah, but we didn't have a remote yet. It was, it was just like, that was, future technology. So it was crazy. It was crazy. It's just crazy to talk about it.
I also
But
think that like at that age, because it sounds like most of us are relatively the same age,
Yeah.
that
yeah,
going into a movie at that age, regardless of what it was, and children who are that age now going into a movie, totally different,
yeah,
like mental state.
Yeah.
yeah,
Kids now are like so much more advanced, I
yeah,
think, than we were. So you're going into this, Oscar award winning, very deep movie, and you're like, oh, cool, Tom Hanks. He was, in a mermaid
yeah,
movie, like, and now they're
yeah,
like, well, now they can like rattle off all of the stats, and like, oh, well, he's
yeah.
won this many Oscars, and a totally different like mental mentality.
Yeah, it's like they're watching Inside Out, where they're like, "Oh, I have all these emotions, and I have to like like, this is how I can explain these emotions." Versus like, I didn't have that, so I was like going into this movie, and I'm like, "Why am I crying when somebody died?" Right? Like it's like you can't process the same way as you would nowadays, where it's like movies are just very different.
Although we were definitely, and I had this conversation at work the other day, our generation was definitely exposed to way more heavy, especially
Yeah.
kids heavy. I mean, Land Before Time and
Oh.
American Tail, and like, I can't watch those movies now without like Homeward Bound. Are you kidding?
Oh no.
We were
Dead.
traumatized, man.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
traumatized. And now
Traumatized.
it's like Inside Out is like, let's learn about our emotions and how to
Yeah.
process them. What?
Yeah.
No.
Back then, they're like, "Here's a dead dog, deal with it."
Yep.
And we're like, "What the fuck? Like, how? I can't process that right now." Anyway, so I have to get to the chat really quick. So Heartless 7 says, "Hello everyone. Mama said this will be a good one. Love it." He also redeemed hydrate, so everybody needs to take a sip of whatever of their water. I'll be unhealthy for all of us. So he also redeemed take a bite. So whatever you're eating. And he also redeemed, yes, he also redeemed quote that film. Um, Producer staff, is that for all of us, or is that just for? Oh, it's for all of us. Okay. I will start, and I will go with shrimp salad, shrimp stew, shrimp gumbo, shrimp bread, shrimp pasta, shrimp blah blah blah. When Bubba and him are cleaning the floors. Let's go to you, Katie. Quote that film.
That's really hard.
It is.
But let's go. I mean, I have two. One of them is a scene. It's a whole scene. It's where like, oh, Elvis is staying with them. And it's just
Oh
like that
yeah.
whole banter. You never see his face. It's just that whole sequence of lines is perfect for me. But also the heart-wrenching one that Jenny says where you can't keep trying to rescue me all the time.
We love
Yeah.
that. Let's go to Rachel. Let's go to quote that film.
Oh man. Well, I kind of already did earlier, but I have another one that I really like. That is from that scene that made me bawl my eyes out. And let's see if I can remember exactly how it goes. Um, I don't know if we have a destiny or if we're all just floating around all accidental like on a breeze, but I think it's both. I think that's how it goes. I think maybe it's
Yeah.
both. That really got to me. I don't know why. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's just like where I'm in my life right now, but I'm just
Yeah.
like, ugh, woo, all right, Forrest.
But see, this is what I mean. Like it hits every aspect of like life, right? Like and you can relate that to whatever stage of life or even like I don't want to but I'll go as deep as this. Any stage of grief, right? Like this movie hits, right? Like it hits with everything, right? Let's go to you, Amanda. Let's quote that film. Get a quote.
I always love Jenny's "Dear God, make me a bird so I could fly far, far, far away from here." And
Yes.
we've all been in that like, God, get me out of this
Yes.
thing. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, congratulations. You got it through Quote That Film, y'all. Good. Commendations to all of you. But let's talk about the story really quick. So, let's do this in brief. And then we can get into any so just sort of detail if you want to hit a specific part, or hit a specific anything. So, um, we basically open up with Forrest Gump sitting on a bench, and he's decided to tell his life story to a nurse who's sitting with him. Throughout the entire film, there's different people that are experiencing portions of his life, and we are experiencing the entirety of his life through these portions. As a young boy, he wore leg braces because he had a curved spine and was unable to walk properly. He grew up in a boarding house in Alabama with his mother, who taught him to always believe in himself in spite of his physical limitations. He had a below average IQ, but to get him accepted into a public school, forced mother to agree to sleep with the principal in exchange for forced admission. And I remember this scene specifically. Yeah, in order for him to be accepted into this school, the mom was like, all right, like I'll do a little extra. And it's gut wrenching, but at the same time, it goes to show like how there's no limits a mother's love can go to, in order for this individual to get what he needs, right? Um, then we see Forrest meet Jenny Curran on the first day of school on the bus. They become super good friends and spend their time together. Um, so, God, sorry, this is okay. So, trigger warning for everybody that's watching, just FYI, like there's a lot of shit that's going to be brought up. Anyway, so Jenny's dad is sexually abusive. He, abuses her, abuses mom. And she basically runs to Forrest's house just for like solace, for a place to feel safe. One day, there's a group of children that start to bully Forrest. Jenny tells him to run, and he runs, outrunning the bullies. In the process, his like braces break, and he actually runs like perfectly normal. And he like escapes all of them. And that was sort of like a historical sort of scene in the movie. What I find interesting, and I want to like bring light to this and shed light to this, is like in the beginning, Forrest suffers from two disabilities, right? Like not only is he mentally disabled, but he's also physically disabled. And it's the situation that frees himself from one of them. But he also doesn't realize that he has a disability throughout the entirety of the film, right? Which goes to show, like, I think it's just a testament and a monument to like how we don't really honor people with disabilities, or we don't like put them sort of at the forefront of laws, policies, ADA compliance, to showing that like these people can live normal lives, right? Like we have people in our society, and sometimes like currently in our Congress, right, that feel like these people should not be productive people in our society, right? And I feel like this film, it doesn't necessarily point it out, but you're like, he's living a life that like maybe none of us that maybe don't have disabilities will never experience, right? And so I just feel like it's really important to point that out, right? Like that like people with disabilities, they can live normal lives, and they are functioning human beings. Like they are humans and people. And I feel like this movie sheds light on that in a lot of ways. So time passes. Forrest and Jenny remain good friends. In high school, Forrest gets noticed by a football scout and accepted into college on a sports scholarship. During this time, the college gets desegregated and a number of Black students are admitted, a historic event at which Forrest is present. So we get this whole historical thing of desegregation of schools, right? That he experiences, and it's just like, okay, cool. Forrest ends up meeting President Kennedy after getting recruited onto the All-American football team. So after he graduates high school, he joins the army and meets a friend at boot camp, Bubba, who we all know, a young Black man whose one dream is to start a shrimping business. So he has an easy life in the army because he listens and follows orders. He's very, very wonderful at doing that. But while in the army, Forrest finds out that Jenny was expelled from college because she posed nude in a magazine wearing her school sweater. So Forrest goes to find Jenny in Memphis, where she is seen naked at a strip club. Forrest tells Jenny he loves her and that he is being sent to Vietnam. I think this is one of my initial scenes in the movie where we see Jenny singing naked. She's singing how many roads was there walked down before, and they're like throwing shit at her, and she's just like people are degrading her and all that stuff. And it was sort of the thing where I was just like, damn, like you have two separate lives going on here, right? But ultimately you have these two people that come together in time, that sort of they eventually come together and stuff happens as going on. What did we think about from that point to this point in the movie? Let's start with you, Amanda. What were your thoughts on this point?
As a kid, I you know I just, it was a movie I was watching. As an adult, as an autistic adult, I definitely like felt everything that was going on. And the later the film gets, the more I identify with him in, there are some very like key components of his personality that are neurodivergent. And, I live my life and I work and I go and do the things that I do, and, normal person for the most part. But, he does all his things and goes to college, and he is living with, like you said, a disability that isn't really, it's seen, but it also isn't seen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I identified with the earlier part of the movie pretty hardcore.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like, a lot of times, like, I work in higher ed. I work with people that are in, DSPS, that are not in that program, right? That don't know that they need certain services. And I feel like the fact that you related to this earlier part, and then it gets to a point where it's like, now he's doing all this like wonderful and incredible shit with a disability, like, is absolutely fucking amazing. And just getting, like I said, we had films already that were in place, right? Like we have What's Eating Gilbert Grape, right? Like we have Leo DiCaprio playing that wonderful, role. We have certain films that were there, but I feel like Forrest Gump, it touched certain aspects of that other films didn't, right? Where it was like, it was there, but it wasn't the main attraction, right? Like it wasn't the main thing that people had to focus on. but I appreciated it nonetheless. And I appreciated the fact that like it, and I don't want to say normal because what is normal, right? Like what is the norm? But I appreciated the fact that somebody that's not neurodivergent, that's not, you know, um, in that in that community, that that I could relate in ways that I could also support in the work that I do. And I feel like Forrest Gump teaches that even to kids, right? Like even to young kids where they can understand what people like this are going through, right? Let's go to you, Rachel. What did you think about from the beginning of the film to this point? What were your thoughts?
Um, I mean, I have a hard time deciding whether the beginning or the end is my favorite. But uh I will say that I do think Forrest is aware that he well he says a couple times in the movie that like he's not a smart man. Like he
Yeah.
acknowledges that 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 is something that was put on him. Both to Jenny is like you know, I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is. And then when he
Mm,
meets his kid, I know I'm kind of going to the end, but he, you know, asks like, is he like me? You know, and
yeah.
I think that at least up until that midpoint of the movie, um, there's still so many experiences that he has, so many feelings. Um, like I think this happens in the beginning with Jenny's, you know, he asks her like, why don't you love me?
Mm,
Like they're you know, they have such a connection. They're like peas and carrots, and he's kind and he cares about her. And like that's something that many people can relate to. You know, you
yeah.
have um, you know, there are so many things that he feels, that
Yeah.
he experiences, that he kind of talks through that you're like, yeah, that's something that I relate to too. Yes, no, I did not join the army and lose my best friend. Um,
Mm,
or I have to wear leg braces. But I was bullied um growing up. And so there's a lot of themes that and I think that's what makes the movie really special. And I know you said uh that it reminds people that that people who may have a disability or neurodivergency, that there's nothing wrong with that. We are all
yeah.
people. And I guess maybe it just helps people relate to others. I think that is important in today's society because there's so much otherness, like
Yeah.
the hate of the other, that
Mm,
it does make this special. It kind of um, connects everybody to connects everybody under just being a human.
yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is and he's going through shit that like some of us will never experience, right? Whether we are disabled, whether we're not, right? Like I will probably never in my life, even though, even though Joe Biden was at my college 1 year for some shit, and you know I didn't get to go, but they are experiencing things. Forrest is experiencing things that I will probably never experience in my life, right? Like, and it goes to show that like while he may not be the smartest, you know, tool in the shed, like he at least knows enough to get to do what he needs to do in order to get through that, right? And I feel like a lot of people who are like, oh, they can't join the military. I'm like, well, right? Like, or they can't play sports. Well, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just like it's this thing where like, you know, people don't. You're right. People don't treat the other like human, and this movie shows that no, they are right.
I do want
Yeah.
to touch on that just real quick. So I think it's really important, speaking of the beginning of the movie, his mother
Mm,
like ingrains in him is like, don't you let anybody tell you, I don't remember what the
yeah.
exact quote is, like that you're different, that you can't do anything. And it really like that is the theme of the whole movie. He never thinks he can't do anything. That's
Yeah.
never a thought in his mind. He just does. He does. he lives and he loves, and he's like, okay. He's like, yes, man.
But it's
And
also an interesting point because all of the things he does, playing football, playing ping pong, the whole running across the country thing, none of it's planned. None of it's like, oh, this
No.
is
Yeah.
the decision I'm going to make and this is the plan that I'm going to,
no,
go after. It's all stuff that just
he rolls
happens. He rolls with it.
with.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like learning
Let's
how to adapt in life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Adaptation, right? Let's go to you, Katie. What did you think about the film from the beginning up to this point?
Yeah, I was actually going to touch on the parent aspect.
Yes.
There's so much amazing setup in this where you learn who Forrest is and where he came from, and I really want to just I really hone in on the idea of how Forrest had a champion in his mother, because in many circumstances, a kiddo like this would not thrive. It's a recipe for a if they even if something slightly went off, it would be a very, very bad future for them. But this is, I mean, his mother did so much, you know, some of it, was a sacrifice for her. Most of it was, but there were some pretty bad things along the way. Um, but it allowed Forrest, whether you want to say it's from his mother or the way that he is, um, can live life without a filter and just be like,
Mm.
okay, I have an opportunity, take said opportunity. And up until this point, of course, we're seeing it as an outsider, like, oh, great, he's doing the 60s, 70s sampler platter of historic things to do as a male during that time. But at the same time, we're seeing so much setup for what's to come. And that's amazing. But it's all really thanks to his mother being his champion.
But it wasn't just his mom, because I don't think at any point, there were bullies throughout the film,
Mhm.
but Jenny never made him feel different, and
Yeah.
Bubba never made him feel different, and Lieutenant Dan never made him feel different. So he, that message that he got from his mom was carried through his whole life. He had
Yeah.
these
Mm.
champions in his corner throughout these different periods of time. And I think that, then it's like nature versus nurture. Like it
Mm.
started with his mom, but it continued, and he somehow found himself surrounded by people who continued that narrative for him.
For
Mm.
sure. He
Yeah.
learned early on how to surround himself with the right people.
And when you're neurodivergent, you do. That just is a thing.
Yeah.
You
Mm.
learn how to, you learn to mask when you need to mask, and you figure out very quickly the people that you don't need to mask with.
Mm. Yeah, and I will say, I will say, yeah, finding the people that, like you said, you can mask around and then not is, but having somebody at a young age, like being enforced like that, and then being told that they're okay is very rare. Because a lot of times I meet a lot of disabled students who are like, either their mental state is down because they've been told that they can't do something, or they've been told by people in other either departments or in other places that they can't be allowed to get these resources. And it sucks. But I feel like with Forrest, like with the story here, you're right. Like he was enforced he was supported in every aspect where he was, and he wasn't treated as different. He was treated as somebody who had value, even though, right, like he was like, I'm not smart. But like other people were like, no, like I'm gonna utilize your skills. I'm gonna utilize who you are. I'm gonna utilize you as a human, right? And and I think that's sort of like the beauty of like all of these characters like put, right? Like even with Jenny, like I get that like maybe her, you know, having sex with him was like maybe a little thing, but then her also being like, this is your kid. Like this is what we produced, and like this is yours, right? And then him being like, oh, cool, like not cool, but like, oh, like this is the thing that I now have to do, right? And then at the very end, right, like him, um, visiting Jenny's grave, and sending, Forrest Jr. off to his first day at school, right? It was like a whole full circle, right? Like where he had to do that. And I feel like that's something that people don't realize, that like people with disabilities do all the time, right? Like it's not like they just live their lives in a silo, right? Or doing just don't do that, right? Let's get to the very end. I know, sorry. So I was late and now I'm like rushing through everything. So I apologize for everybody. So in Vietnam, Forrest and Bubba are put under control of the command of Lieutenant Dan. Long story short, Bubba's killed. It's very tragic. But Forrest goes back and retrieves all the soldiers, and it wins the Medal of Honor. He saves Lieutenant Dan, but then Lieutenant Dan loses both of his legs. But while he's at the hospital, he learns how to play ping pong, which Amanda alluded to earlier, and he becomes like a world champion of ping pong. And basically like excels in that. So back in Washington, he received a Medal of Honor. He's pulled into an anti-war demonstration where he runs into Jenny again, who's become a hippie radical, right? Like she's like, fuck the system, do all that stuff. She's also in an abusive relationship with Forrest, tries to protect her from, but it doesn't do any good, right? So Forrest plays ping pong internationally. He runs into Lieutenant Dan, who's in a wheelchair and living on disability. But then they become roommates. They live together, and then we get that iconic scene where it's like New Year's, and Forrest is like, "Oh, Happy New Year's, Lieutenant Dan!" And Lieutenant Dan has a confetti flying him, and he's like just depressed in his wheelchair. So Dan laughs at him, sarcastically tells him that if his dream ever comes true, he will be Forrest's first mate. Jenny gets addicted to drugs and continues to go from one abusive relationship to another. So Forrest is discharged and is asked to endorse the ping pong paddle, which earns him $25,000. And with his money, he buys a shrimping boat, keeping his promise to Bubba, who he said that he would buy one and they could do, shrimping for life. He names the boat Jenny, cute, but has very little success with it. Lieutenant Dan keeps his promise and to Forrest, and he joins him and in his shrimping endeavors, right? So long story short, Hurricane Carmen blows through, and Jenny is one of the only boats, or is the only boat to survive, and immediately they hit success, right? It was at this point that he discovers that his mom is dying of cancer. He returns home to her. Lieutenant Dan invests Forrest part of the money into Apple computers, earning Forrest a fortune. So Forrest is like a millionaire at this point, and he doesn't even fucking know. He's like, "Oh, okay, cool, like awesome. I have all this money." One day, Jenny visits Forrest and stays with him for a while. When Forrest proposes to her, she declines, but this is the night that Jenny pulls him in and they have sex. Jenny leaves and he's devastated. And this is when Forrest starts running a marathon across the country. He's like, "I'm not going to stop running," right? Which gives credence to the fact that he knows what it's like to feel this maybe anger, grief, like all these things, right? And he just starts running. And he even catches Jenny's attention. She's like, "Oh shit." Long story short, when the scene shifts back to the present at the bench, Forrest tells the woman sitting next to him that he's in Savannah to visit Jenny, who wrote him. When Forrest goes to see Jenny, she introduces him to her son, Forrest. Jenny tells Forrest that the boy is his and that she is sick with an unknown virus, which we can all assume is AIDS, right? Because around this time, it was just running rampant. And I think this is something that also too, like a lot of times, like people that are like, that are ignorant or that don't know, think that it's just a gay disease. But back then, like everybody was getting this, like everybody didn't know what was going on. And people in that movement, and I always joke with my friend, I'm like, yeah, like if I had lived back then, like who knows, like it was a wild time, right? And that she basically alludes that she's getting sick. The three move to Greenbow, and Jenny and Forrest get married, which is the cutest scene. Lieutenant Dan comes to the wedding with his fiance. He's no longer in a wheelchair, but has prosthetic legs, which I think gives a nod to when Forrest had those braces on himself when he was a kid, which I think is like kind of cool in that way. but they live a happy life, but Jenny eventually dies. The last scene in the film that we see is Forrest sending Forrest Jr. to the bus on on his first day of school, which I feel is like so impactful, right? And we get that sort of like life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, right? Especially a See's candy chocolate box that your aunt gives you and has no fucking idea what kind of chocolate you like, right? So I loved this film in this latter part. I think it taught us a lot of lessons. I think the fact that like someone like Forrest can raise a kid, can have, parental rights, can have all these things, and can live a healthy and wonderful life is beautiful and amazing, right? And it was beautiful, right? So I'm gonna go to you all. Amanda, let's go to you first. What did you think about the latter half of Forrest Gump? And how did you think it ended and what effects it had?
It's such an interesting movie in general because so many of those events they're like vignettes of his life, but you like it almost seems like it isn't one whole movie. Like it's so many different
Yeah.
little movies. And I some of those events are some of my favorites where he like inadvertently catches the Watergate burglars. Um, I don't know if
Yeah.
any of you have read the book, but there are some very interesting events that happen in his life that never made it into the movie.
Mm,
Like
Like he went
NASA.
into space and he became a professional wrestler. Um, I think you see the growth in him emotionally and mentally at different stages of his life with the running thing after Jenny leaves. I think is him learning how to like process emotion, and he is just like, I didn't know what to do. I just went for a run, and then he runs across the country like I
He
just
does.
felt like running,
mm.
and then spawns a bumper sticker movement on the way. And so a lot of the events are like inadvertent things, which is really interesting. And then yeah, you get that full circle moment. And that first time, and he has said like I'm not a smart man throughout the movie, but I think that moment when he asks Jenny if his son is like him is really the first time that you understand that he
Mm.
knows that there
Mm.
is something going on, because he's like, "Oh, is this kid like me or is this kid smart?" And then obviously the kid goes on to be raised same amount of tolerance and respect
Mm.
and whatever that Forrest I think had in him. It would have been interesting to see a sequel where that kid kind of grows up, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the ending is poignant and beautiful, and I hated parts of it because I just didn't want it to end. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's an amazing movie.
Yeah. I didn't get that question of, is he like me? Right. As a kid, because you're like, what do you mean? Like, for me, like, as a naive, like, kid who had a diverse population of friends, right? I was like, why did he ask? Like, like, what is it like? Is like, and then as you grow up, you're like, oh, like oh, okay.
And I think for
But
me, like, I wasn't diagnosed autistic as a kid. I had other diagnoses that I think just turned out to not be correct, and I was diagnosed as an adult. But I definitely think that moment, even as a child, was like,
yeah.
oh, oh, he's different. Oh, why is
Mm,
he asking if he's different? Like it resonated, I
mm,
think, a little bit more with me because I was raised knowing that there was something wrong.
mm,
And it didn't change or shape things differently for me, but the realization was there, and even at a
yeah.
young age I knew that. So that was a really like strong moment for me.
Yeah. Well, and it's also impactful in a way where it's like you said, you find it, even if it's at the end, like you realize that he knew there was something, right? Like he knew there was just something that wasn't right. And I don't want to say like right in a bad way, but like he knew that there was something that
Different.
yeah. And that was super impactful. Let's go to you, Katie. How did you feel about this middle to the end, and everything that happened in between?
Oh, so many feelings, so many thoughts. I think one thing that's important, they touch on it a little bit, but they kind of give you a taste how the country treats its veterans. You see that
Hmm.
directly with Lieutenant Dan, and I think
Hmm.
that's really, really important. But you see very two different takes. You know, you have the Forrest route, then you have the Lieutenant Dan route, depending on what happens to you, which is really sad.
Yeah.
You also, I love movies where it's based on like actual events, but
Yes.
they almost like fantasize things, like the bumper sticker and like the Nike shoes and everything. We're just like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool if it happened that way. Um, I just, you know, it really, they did such a good job of at the same time wrapping up the characters and how far they've all come
Yeah.
while not sacrificing the story and how much more Forrest has to go. Because, you know, we leave him, you know, sitting on at the end of his driveway as Forrest Jr. goes off to school and the feather once again floats away. So you're left to wonder what's next. What's next for them, you know? And those are the kind of things I like to think about. And those are really perfect endings where it gets you thinking like, oh, I'd love to know. I'm glad we never got a second one, but
Yeah.
it gets my imagination going. But yeah, I could go on.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, I'm glad we didn't get like a second, like half-ass done, like Forrest Gump 2. It ended, I think it ended perfectly. It's almost like The Help, right? Where it was like it ended, and then it was like because we knew her days as a nanny were over, right? And then it was just like, but what's next, right? Like, what are the possibilities with that, right? I feel like with Forrest Gump, it was like we knew that everything was going to be all right. We knew everything was going to work out because it's Forrest Gump. Like he did all these things, right? Like, and now he's ready to probably be a father, right? And so I appreciated the way that it happened. And then last but not least, Rachel, what did you think about the middle to the end of this? What are your thoughts?
Ah, well, I mean, the ending is always the part that gets me, gets me sobbing. Um, I don't want to forget to mention that the music throughout is just
Mm,
bonkers awesome. Through the time periods. That is the best. Like the score is great. And then the song choices are great. And that theme, that feather theme, kind of comes back. It's um that destiny versus floating on a breeze. It's like I think that's like a very powerful um image. I know I'm kind of like going off on a tangent here at the very end. Because you guys all covered a lot of like the best parts of the movie. I will say though that this last time that I watched it, I had a little bit more of an appreciation for Jenny. I remember for a very long time, I did not like Jenny at all. I
mm,
didn't I was like, yeah, she had a shitty life. But like, but she's also kind of a shitty person. Um, I feel like
yeah.
I gave her a lot less shit this time around. I was just like, yeah, you did have a really like who would I be if I had like all of these abuses in my childhood and adolescent and adult life and like who would I be? Like how would I don't know, be perceived, whatever. So this time around I really appreciated Jenny a little bit more in the end. Um Still kind of annoyed me throughout.
Yeah.
I was just like,
Yeah.
no, Jenny, no, Jenny, no. um, but yeah, I think that the end of the movie we get a lot of these grief moments and we get to
Mm,
see how he handles it. And that
yeah.
moment I kind of mentioned it earlier where he's, telling Jenny about his travels and like what he saw, like through his eyes. Like, um, I'm trying to think of all the different things, like being on the boat and going for his run and seeing like the mountains reflected in the water, and then the sunset, where it was like you don't know where the sky begins and or heaven begins and the earth ends or whatever. And how like wow, this is how he sees the world. And like she was always on his mind. Like, and he, I don't know, I guess it is a happy ending to an extent. Like he got this new family that he didn't know that he could have, and he did get, some time with Jenny in the way that he wanted it. um and we got to imagine what his life could be, but we know he could handle it because we already saw all the other things that he could handle, and he's going to do it amazingly. Being a father is just another one of those adventures, one of those journeys that was sort of thrust upon him. And he's just gonna rock it. And one more thing I will add is that bus driver, is she a vampire? Does anybody else have that moment where you're like, wait, how old is she? How old is she? They should have aged her a little bit more. It was like, I believe she's still alive because like she was like 12 years older or whatever than Forrest. Like she'd be, I don't know. How old is he supposed to be at the end? In his 40s? I don't know.
And baby girl was smoking. She should not look that good.
No, exactly. So that my only criticism. I was just like, wait a second, the bus driver, that's a weird, I don't know, continuity. Oh, speaking of continuity, I'm just gonna go off on a little tangent right here. Anybody else, there's that moment when Lieutenant Dan shows up on the dock with the boat. Forrest jumps off the boat and the boat is going this way. And you see the dock and he gets up on the dock and then the camera is this way. And then the boat somehow manages to float into this dock in the background. I'm like, wait, the boat was just going this way. Did the boat turn on itself? Like, continuity, man.
I never noticed that.
If I can throw out a little fun fact here, the guy who wrote the novel of Forrest Gump actually wrote a sequel.
He did?
He did. It came out in 1995. It is called Gump and Company, and apparently takes place starting in the 80s, and apparently gets really meta, and Forrest Gump meets Tom Hanks. It was optioned for a movie. They were starting to pick up a little bit of steam. 9/11 happened, apparently rendering a lot of the things in the sequel like irrelevant, and the project was next.
I guess.
Wow.
But it is out there.
That I don't want to say thanks 9/11, but yikes, that would have been terrible. That would have been terrible. I don't
But
think
it is out
good.
there. Gump
No.
and Company.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, writer.
I will agree with you that like as I peeked into adulthood, Jenny pissed me off because I'm like, how the fuck are you making these decisions? Like, what?
You
Like,
also have to acknowledge the time period in which these
I
decisions were being
do.
made.
No
Which
therapy.
is, yeah, just so no therapy, and like I said earlier, me and my friend were always talking about like if we lived through the '60s, we would be dead. Like we'd be dead because we're like we're fun. We interact with people, all that stuff. Meanwhile, there's like drugs, alcohol, all that stuff, and there's no therapy around, right? So your therapy is like drugs. Your therapy is like alcohol. Your therapy is,
Free
doing
love,
all this shit. Yeah, like
fighting the
sex.
wars. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I get that. But at the same time, I'm like, girl. You know what I mean? I don't know. Anyway.
I guess I didn't have
So,
the same hatred for her. Like, yeah, she made a lot of really crap decisions, but I also think that she did everything that she did with his best interest at heart. Like it was to protect him from the things that she had seen when she told him to run away from the bullies, when she told him to get away when she was getting on the bus, like she was shielding him from like horrible shit. So
yeah. But I also think that's because she like loved him, like low key, like there was this connection. And but you're right, like part of love is like it may be shielding people that you love and support and care about from the things that may have caused you trauma, or the things that may have harmed you. that you don't want to expose them to. So I like totally feel that.
And she
Um,
also didn't really have like the role model. Like she didn't know
no,
how to love
yeah,
properly. So
yeah, absolutely.
And we know she wanted
Well,
freedom too. Sorry.
yeah, no, keep going.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
we know she wanted freedom so much. She probably just saw Forrest as like another thing that would hold her back and hold her down because she, wanted to get away so bad that when she was finally able to do, she wasn't going to stick around. Like,
Yeah,
no. I got that and I didn't get that. I was like,
yeah,
because I've been there myself, but like, I was also just like, but it's Forrest.
yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Just coming back when he's rich? What?
But he didn't know and he didn't care. You know what I mean? Like he came back, he was like, cool, I just love you. And she was like, money. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway,
She sell a
they,
newspaper.
she did. She knew. She knew what she was doing. Speaking of knowing what we're doing, that is all the time we have today to talk about Forrest Gump. You all have been absolutely amazing. It's been a pleasure to do this review with you. Thank you all to Amanda, Rachel, and Katie. You all have been wonderful at giving your input and doing whatever you need to do. You are welcome back anytime. Tell us where we can find you. Let's start with you, Katie. Where can we find you on these socials?
Sure, you can find me on Instagram at K Tidwell, but without an I, so KT Dwell. That's the best way you could say it.
Love that. Love that. And Rachel, where can we find you on the socials?
Currently on Facebook under my name, and then on Instagram and TikTok under Swendy Does Stuff. So if you look at my name, it's SWENDI, not Wendy. It's not Wendy Does Stuff. Swendy dash does stuff. Honestly, that name might change because somebody told me the other day that it sounds real dirty, and I'm like, oh, okay. So currently, Swendy Does Stuff.
I love Swendy Does Stuff. I don't think that sounds dirty. And then last but not least, Amanda, where can we find you on the socials?
also on Facebook under my name and on TikTok and Instagram at Yollin.
I love that. Oh my God, I love that. You can find me on Instagram at CityOfStars13. I don't post a lot, but like I always say, I feel like it's like my my headline now. I post funny stories, so that's always fun. And I'm getting a little bit more active on TikTok, but I'm hesitant to share that because I need to like build up. You know what I mean? Like I need to build up my what's my niche. So but I think you can find me. Hold on, wait. I gotta find my. Oh, it's Jordyn Daniels here. So JORDYN Daniels here on TikTok. It's been wonderful and awesome. Thank you again for tuning in. Be sure to join our Discord to keep the conversation going, as well as subscribing to all platforms at Nom Talk Network. So you can find us on Discord, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on TikTok, anywhere, but it's Nom Talk Network. Tune into our next show. It's going to be a Monday. Hey, we're going to be doing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade. Oh my gosh. If you've seen those, please tune in. Some of my favorite films. It's going to be awesome and amazing. Until then, I am your host, Jordyn Orozco, and I hope you have a wonderful and a nomorific evening. Bye, y'all.